They tried to bury her with a lie she answered with the truth, and shook the entire justice system. If this happened to your sister or daughter, what would you do? And how far would you go to protect her? On a bright Saturday afternoon in Mesa, Arizona, 17-year-old Layla Morgan had no idea her future was about to be thrown into chaos. With her sights set on Stanford's pre-law program and a track record of straight A's and athletic excellence, Layla was the kind of teen everyone admired, disciplined, driven, and deeply loved by her parents, both high school teachers. That day's errand was simple. Her old backpack had finally fallen apart, and with finals just 2 weeks away, she needed a new one. She headed to Budget Outlet, a no-frills shop tucked between a laundromat and a pawn store. It wasn't fancy, but it was affordable and close to home. Her mother had teased her that morning. "Don't spend a fortune, honey," as Layla laughed and grabbed her keys. Inside, the store buzzed with noise, kids darting through crowded aisles, announcements over a crackly speaker, someone arguing about a return at the counter. Layla found a navy backpack quickly, stood in line, and casually checked her phone. That's when a man in a red shirt tapped her shoulder and said she needed to come to the back. She hadn't touched a thing, but already the weight of suspicion had begun to settle before she even had the chance to speak. Layla Morgan followed the store manager through the crowded aisles, every step feeling heavier than the last. She kept thinking there had to be some mistake, that this would all be sorted out in seconds. The manager, a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a hard stare, said, "Someone saw her slip merchandise into her bag." Layla blinked in disbelief. "I haven't even touched anything except the backpack," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond. They entered a cramped office in the back of the store that smelled like burnt coffee and rolled carpet. The manager shut the door and motioned for her to empty her pockets and bag. With shaking hands, Layla did exactly that. Her phone, student ID, lip gloss, and the backpack she hadn't even purchased yet fell onto the desk. The security tag was still attached. The manager didn't look satisfied. If anything, he seemed annoyed. There wasn't more to find. "I still have to call the police," he said flatly. "Store policy." Layla's heart sank. "But I didn't do anything," she whispered. "There must be footage. You have cameras, right?" He shook his head as he picked up the office phone. "That's not up to me." Minutes later, a police officer arrived. He was polite, almost apologetic, but that didn't stop him from placing cold steel cuffs around her wrists and walking her out the front of the store like a criminal. Layla stared at the floor, trying to avoid the looks from the other shoppers. At the station, she was booked for petty theft. No one really asked for her side of the story. They handed her a court date and sent her home with wrists still sore and red from the cuffs. That night, Layla cried into her pillow, trying not to let her parents hear. She was terrified that this one misunderstanding would destroy everything she'd worked so hard for. 2 weeks later, Layla stood in front of the Maricopa County Courthouse, wearing her best dress, gripping a folder full of glowing report cards, character letters, and track team awards. Her parents sat behind her, silent and tense. Her attorney, a distracted man named Mr. Halverson, had promised to request surveillance footage and argue her case. But when the judge, Constance Weller, entered the courtroom, Layla felt a chill run down her spine. Judge Weller barely looked at her. She read the report, ignored the offer to submit the footage, and declared there was enough probable cause to proceed with felony charges, not just petty theft, felony grand theft. Layla could barely breathe. Her attorney muttered "noted" and sat down. Layla wanted to stand up, to scream, to shout the truth, but all she could do was sit there in silence as her future unraveled. Bail was set at $5,000. Her parents looked broken. Her mother whispered about loans. Her father buried his face in his hands. As the judge moved on to the next case, Layla realized the courtroom didn't see her as a student or a daughter. They saw her as a criminal, and no one seemed to care. Layla sat in the courthouse hallway, numb, her body present, But her spirit, somewhere far away, the noise of echoing footsteps, murmured conversations, and courtroom doors swinging open felt like it was happening underwater. Her lawyer, Mr. Halverson, mumbled something about appeals and options, but she didn't register a word. Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. There was only one person left who could help. She typed the message slowly. Eli, it's happening. I need you. Then she hit send. Not even 30 seconds later, her phone lit up. Don't sign anything. I'm calling now. Elijah Morgan wasn't just her older brother. He was the U.S. Attorney General. Layla had never wanted to involve him. She knew what would happen, how big it would become, how messy. But this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a setup, and someone needed to flip the table. Back in Washington, D.C. Eli was already pacing his office. Sleeves rolled, tie loose, jaw tight. Layla's text wasn't a cry for help. It was a signal flare. And he knew it. He didn't go through his assistant. He called his personal contact in Phoenix directly. Caleb Rhodes, Assistant U.S. Attorney. I need boots in that courtroom. Eli said. Now. Judge Weller's name just came across my desk for all the wrong reasons. Caleb didn't ask questions. I'm on it. And Caleb, Eli added, dig into everything on her. I want complaints, rulings, sealed records, all of it, in Tempe. Layla sat with her parents in the courthouse cafeteria. None of them touched their food. Her mother clutched a styrofoam cup like it was porcelain. Her father tapping his knee anxiously. Layla's phone buzzed again. Stay put. Someone's coming. Don't let Halverson do anything without calling me. Moments later, a tall man in a navy suit walked into the cafeteria, eyes scanning until they landed on her. Miss Morgan, he asked. I'm Caleb Rhodes. Your brother sent me. Her breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in days, something like relief flickered behind her eyes. Caleb sat down and listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't doubt her. He took notes as Layla told him about the store, the backpack, the cuffs, the judge. Her parents filled in the rest, their words laced with both fury and heartbreak. When she finished, Caleb leaned back, tapped his pen against his notepad, and said, Your brother's already pulling Weller's full judicial record. Meanwhile, I'm filing an emergency motion to force the court to release the surveillance footage. That'll buy us time, Layla asked. And if they don't, Caleb looked her in the eye, his voice steady. Then, we fight harder. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. He glanced down and let out a quiet, dangerous smile. Your brother's fast. Judge Weller's got a record, and not the kind she wants public. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked at the family. This isn't just about your case anymore. It's about hers. Stay close. Things are about to shift. And for the first time, Layla felt like someone powerful was standing beside her, not above her, but with her, ready to burn the whole system down if that's what justice required. While Layla Morgan waited anxiously in the hallway of the courthouse, Caleb Rhodes moved with the precision of a man who knew time was a weapon. He went straight to the clerk's office, emergency motion in hand, requesting immediate review and release of the store's surveillance footage. At first, the clerk hesitated. Judges didn't like surprises, and Judge Weller hated them, but Caleb wasn't here to ask. He leaned in and said calmly but firmly, This isn't a routine request. If you delay, you'll be part of it. 10 minutes later, Layla and her parents were ushered into an impromptu hearing. Judge Weller sat behind the bench, her eyes sharp and unamused. Caleb entered with confidence, announced his presence on behalf of the U.S. Attorney General, and laid out the motion. Weller refused to acknowledge his authority at first, calling the motion irrelevant and disruptive. But Caleb stood his ground. He cited her history, the complaints filed, the sealed settlements now unsealed. Weller turned pale. She tried to proceed with Layla's case like nothing had changed, but her voice cracked when she denied the motion again. That's when Caleb dropped the file, thick, damning, impossible to ignore, onto the defense table. 32 formal complaints, he said. Patterns of judicial misconduct, all leading back to this courtroom. The room fell into tense silence. Even the court reporter paused. Judge Weller's face flushed red. Her gavel came down hard. Motion under review. Court is adjourned until further notice. She barked. Before fleeing to her chambers, Layla looked at Caleb. Stunned. Did we win? She whispered. Caleb shook his head. Not yet, but she's rattled. Within hours. Layla Morgan stepped off a black SUV outside the courthouse, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket. He looked less like the country's top prosecutor and more like a man about to kick down a door. Inside, he handed a sealed letter to the clerk, an official federal investigation notice signed by the Deputy Attorney General himself. From that moment, the case was no longer just state business. It was federal. DOJ agents began pulling Weller's case files, reviewing courtroom transcripts, calling in former defendants for testimony. Layla, who had felt invisible for weeks, suddenly became the center of a storm that wasn't about her guilt or innocence anymore. It was about what this courtroom had become. As news crews began arriving, reporters scrambled to piece together a scandal years in the making. Meanwhile, Layla sat beside her parents, no longer trembling but grounded, watching as the machine that had tried to crush her began to crack. Caleb returned with updates. Eli coordinated from behind the scenes, and for the first time, Layla believed the system might actually have to answer for itself. The girl who once sat silently in a courtroom now sat in the eye of justice's reckoning, and she wasn't afraid anymore. Because truth, once given a voice and a spotlight, couldn't be buried not by a gavel, not by a title, not by fear. The next morning, the Maricopa County Courthouse looked nothing like it had the day before. Satellite trucks lined the curb, journalists swarmed the sidewalks, and armed security flanked every entrance. Inside, Layla Morgan sat with her parents and Caleb Rhodes at the defense table, while U.S. Attorney General Layla Morgan stood quietly in the gallery, arms folded. His presence alone enough to shift the air in the room. Judge Weller entered late, her usual confidence thinned by the weight of public attention. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the energy buzzed like a live broadcast. As she called the session to order, her voice was steady, but lacked the cold edge it once had. Caleb stood and requested immediate dismissal of all charges against Layla, based on newly surfaced evidence of systemic misconduct. He handed over a file so thick it nearly fell apart at the spine. Inside were complaints, sealed settlements, transcripts, and email records painting a clear picture of bias and procedural violations. Weller tried to object, but before she could, Eli stepped forward. Breaking courtroom protocol with deliberate calm, he addressed the judge directly, reminding her and everyone present that when a courtroom's integrity is in question, no proceeding can move forward. Weller's jaw clenched, and she tried to maintain control, but the storm had already landed. After a long pause, she dismissed the charges without prejudice, muttering the words like poison. Layla didn't cheer. She didn't move. She sat there breathing, stunned, as the weight of the nightmare finally lifted. Outside, Eli spoke to the press, not about his position, but about Layla and kids like her. This case is not isolated. He said, it's a symptom, and symptoms mean a deeper disease. We're not done. He announced a federal task force to investigate judicial conduct across Arizona, specifically focusing on patterns of abuse in low-income and minority communities. Headlines exploded. Judge Weller's name trended nationally. News outlets dug through every corner of her career donations. Real estate deals, private prison contracts. What started as a false accusation in a strip mall turned into a full-scale justice overhaul. Meanwhile, Layla stayed grounded. She didn't seek fame. She returned to school quietly, her classmates treating her with newfound respect. Her college acceptance to Stanford was reinstated, along with a new scholarship, this time awarded not just for academic merit but for her courage in the face of systemic injustice. She was invited to speak at schools across the state, And although she was nervous at first, she said yes. In those classrooms, she didn't tell kids to be afraid. She told them to be ready, to know their rights, to use their voices. She didn't pretend the system was fair, but she reminded them it could be challenged. And in doing so, she found her power not in the courtroom, not in the headlines, but in becoming the voice she once needed. Layla's life was no longer defined by what almost broke her, but by what she built from it. Weeks passed, and although the media frenzy began to die down, something inside Layla Morgan had permanently shifted. She no longer walked with the quiet caution she once carried. Now, she moved with a confidence that came not from winning, but from surviving. She didn't crave attention, but she stopped shrinking in rooms that once made her feel small. At school, she returned to her classes like nothing had changed. But everything had. Her classmates watched her differently now, not with pity, but with respect. Her teachers treated her with a level of reverence reserved for someone who had lived through something they couldn't imagine. But it was the nights that challenged her most, when the house was quiet and her mind replayed the cold office, the tightness of the cuffs, the dismissive face of a judge who hadn't seen her as a person. And yet, she didn't avoid the memories. She sat with them. She studied them. She used them. She began writing down her thoughts, journaling what she had felt each step of the way, not just the pain, but the clarity, the realizations, the strength. One afternoon, her former counselor invited her to speak at a youth conference. Layla almost said no. The idea of standing on a stage, reliving the trauma, terrified her. But something in her told her this was exactly why she had been through it, to make sure no one else felt alone if it ever happened to them. She accepted. When she stepped onto the stage in a modest community center gymnasium, her palms were sweating. But when she saw the faces in the crowd, students her age, younger kids, some parents, she steadied herself. She didn't speak like a victim. She spoke like someone who knew exactly how dangerous silence could be. I was nearly erased by one lie, she told them, but I'm still here, and so are you. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to reach them. After the talk, students came up in small groups, some with tears, some just to say thank you. A girl with braids whispered, "I didn't think anyone like me ever won." Layla smiled and replied, "Then let's win together." From that day, she began volunteering part-time with a local youth legal rights group, helping teens understand how to navigate interactions with authority. She helped rewrite brochures, recorded videos, and even sat in on mock courtroom workshops. Her brother Eli watched from afar, proud but distant, never taking credit. This wasn't about him anymore. This was her journey, her choice, her fire. She wasn't the girl sobbing quietly into a pillow anymore. She had become someone who refused to be invisible, who knew exactly how fragile justice could be, and how vital it was to protect it. And although the system hadn't been rebuilt, Layla had rebuilt herself, not as a symbol, not as a headline, but as a force, quiet, steady, unshakable. 6 months later, Layla Morgan stood alone on the edge of Santa Monica Beach, barefoot in the cool sand, the wind brushing against her face as the sun dipped low over the horizon. The sky was a canvas of gold and violet, streaked with scattered clouds that mirrored the complexity of everything she had lived through. Her classes at Stanford had just begun. But this moment, this quiet, was something she'd carved out for herself. A pause before the next chapter. She wasn't here to escape her past. She was here to acknowledge that it hadn't destroyed her. In one hand, she held a folded letter from a student she had spoken to weeks ago, someone who said her story gave them the courage to speak out about injustice at their own school. In the other, her phone buzzed, a message from Eli. "Proud of you. Always. Keep going." Layla smiled but didn't reply right away. She let herself breathe it in. The knowledge that she was still standing, not because she had been saved, but because she had chosen to rise. She thought about everything she had once feared: the courtroom, the cuffs, the judge who saw her as disposable, and now Here she was, not just surviving, but shaping something bigger than herself. The investigation into Judge Weller had led to over 30 reopened cases, 5 reversals, and 1 public apology from the governor. But Layla didn't dwell on that. Justice wasn't a single outcome. It was a constant fight, one she had stepped into, whether she had wanted to or not. And now, she was ready for more. As the tide crept closer to her feet, she pulled out a small journal from her bag and scribbled down a phrase she'd been thinking about for weeks. They tried to erase me, but I remembered the truth louder than their silence. She didn't write it for anyone else. It was a promise to herself, a reminder. She slipped the journal back into her bag and walked down the shore, watching children laugh and tourists snap selfies, none of them knowing the weight she had once carried through those courthouse doors. And that was okay. Her pain didn't need an audience. Her healing didn't require applause. What mattered was that she was free, not just legally, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. She had taken something meant to break her and turned it into a platform for others to stand on. And as the first stars blinked through the twilight, Layla looked up, not for answers, not for signs, but because, for the first time in months, she believed she had the right to dream again, not cautiously, not quietly, but boldly, fiercely, unapologetically. She turned toward the water, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I'm still here." And in that moment, the world felt wide open, not because the fight was over, but because she had learned how to face it on her own terms, with her own voice, and she would never be silenced again. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't shout or fight, it's stand. Stand when you're scared. Stand when they tell you to sit down. Stand even when you're the only one in the room who knows you're right. Layla Morgan didn't change the system overnight, but she proved something even more lasting: that resilience, in the face of injustice, is its own form of rebellion. Her story wasn't about vengeance or rage. It was about truth. A truth that didn't need to be loud to be undeniable. When the world tried to silence her, she chose to speak. When it tried to define her, she rewrote the definition. And through it all, she learned that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you protect. No matter how hard they try to take it away, Layla didn't just survive her trial. She transformed it into a platform that lifted others with her. In real life, cases like Layla's happen more than most people realize. Young people, especially those of color, are often judged not by their actions, but by assumptions. That's why knowing your rights, using your voice, and seeking support is crucial. Communities are stronger when they stand behind their youth. And change happens when even one person refuses to accept silence. Layla's story is a reminder. Don't wait to be rescued. Start rising now.